record, I assume.
Yep, time to record. Let us pause the mucus and begin recording. Alrighty, we are now recording.
Happy Sabbath.
Good morning and happy Sabbath, everybody, to Dan and Susan. Let's see who else is joining us this morning. Nope, those are all comments from last week. Well, then we just assume there's going to be more of you joining us as we go. But for those of you who are joining us online currently, which is quite a few of you, people from, looks like up in Canada, got 2 viewers up there, which is pretty cool. Looks like Arizona, South Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. It's actually like 3 in Virginia, so that's Mom and Dad, I guess. Anyways, good morning and happy Sabbath. We're going to be continuing in our study today on the story of Elijah. And I think last Sabbath we had kind of left off the conversation at the point of the story where God performs the miracle of flour and oil. There we go.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of the exact wording, but it just escaped me.
Yep.
Happy Sabbath, Scott.
The vessel's not failing.
Yeah, with the vessels not failing. So, very interesting, very powerful story. Is there anything that anyone would like to share online that we could pray for, or even any kind of praises that you guys would like to share? Feel free to leave them in the comment section and we'll read them out if you'd like. And in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about our own, I guess. So, you got any prayer requests or anything that you'd like to thank the Lord for?
Nothing out of the usual stuff. I mean, generally everything, but nothing out of the ordinary. I guess safe driving. 81's kind of like a stressful place to drive around, especially like yesterday and all the stupid drivers. Like, that's terrible.
You're just, going back and forth.
Yeah.
So
it's a bad highway.
So to give, can be pretty dangerous. So to give some context to what that's about is we're opening up another gym up north in Roanoke, which is about an hour north of here, about 30 minutes from where he lives, but 81 is the main road that you take to get there. So driving on the interstate is always a sketchy thing, and I hate driving on the interstate myself. Don't like having other people have to drive it either. So
yeah, it's just amazing how much more distracted drivers there are than usual. Like
lots of people on their phone.
Lots of people on their phone, and then like I'm always seeing tractor trailers drifting into like my lane and all that, like constantly. So I'm always passing tractor trailers like as fast as I can.
Yeah, it's a dangerous world to drive in, and I think our dad always says that if people from other countries looked at the statistics of how many people died on the road because of car accidents and stuff, that people probably wouldn't travel here.
Yeah.
Just because it looks like we have this incredibly high mortality rate for...
Well, in the United States, yeah, but everywhere else has a lot of similar rates too. In the United States alone, it's pretty bad, so the whole entire world together is awful.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a couple 100,000 people that die of car accidents, like, every year.
Wow.
Something like that.
It's unfortunate, and a lot of it could be avoided, so... But I guess with that, any prayer requests, just for us as we go into this year with our, with our gyms and with our businesses, keep that in mind. Of course, my dad and our mom, keep them in mind as well for their healing, and especially my dad with his ankle, still broken.
Yep.
It'll be broken for a while yet, but we're thankful that it wasn't anything more serious, and we're thankful for modern medicine for being able to fix things like that. So
Yeah, otherwise you'd just be walking around with a limp.
Yeah.
And a sideways foot.
Poor Dad. So, okay, well, that being said, let's go to the Lord in prayer together, and we will kick off today's study. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much. You have blessed us with an abundance, and you have taken care of us in so many awesome ways. You've given us work. You've provided for our food. There's nothing that we have that you have not provided and given us, and we want to thank you so much for that, from the air that we breathe to every heartbeat that you sustain us with. We don't know when our times come, but at the same time, we know that everything is in your hands to take care of us and to watch over us, and that you have told us that as long as we walk in faith with you, that you will be with us every step of that way. So continue to guide us and protect us. Be with all of our brothers and sisters around the world that are joining us in this stream. Be with me as I present, and help my words to be your words. Help everybody to have the Spirit to contribute to the study. And may you help us to understand more about Elijah and how it's relevant for us today. We love you, and we thank you so much for this blessing in the name of your Son. Amen.
Yeah.
Cool. So,
Amen.
Amen and amen. So, yeah, and Dan and Susan said, thank the Lord, He has designed our bodies to heal, but time is needed for that to happen. Yeah, it's quite miraculous when you just consider the body's ability to recover from significant trauma.
Yeah, and that it adapts to pretty much anything without medicine. Medicine is just a means to correct things, to guide them back into like something. Think of it like gardening for the body.
Gardening for the body.
Because, I mean, your body does all of its healing. The only thing medicine can really do is support that. Medicine does not fix really anything. It just...
It's true. Your body's already the healing machine. You just
have to
give it what it
needs. You have to put the bone back in place and keep it there so it can actually do stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, the body is an amazing thing. And what's kind of neat is the next story we'll be reading about with Elijah is somewhat related to that. Not specifically
about healing
bones, but about healing. So very neat stuff. A respiratory disease.
Yeah.
So that being said, let's go back to the book of 1 Kings, chapter 17.
I'm at 7. Okay, I'm at 17.
There you are. And we'll be reading. Should we back up and talk any more about the story of the multiplication of the flour and the oil? Because that actually has some very interesting significance,
Sure.
and I think we just kind of glossed over it.
Yeah, we were answering a lot of Eric's questions too.
That's true as well. Lots of
He was rapid firing him questions.
He was like, "But what about the Ravens, though?"
What about the Ravens, though?
They're playing in the Super Bowl. I don't know.
That's what happened when I tried to search for Ravens. They just came up with a bunch of football results.
Well, who else would want to know about Ravens, right? Right. Okay. So from that story there, it starts in verse 8, but I would kind of like to back it up to verse 7, because there's also one other thing I would like to add about this, the first part of this event here, where it says, and it came to pass, this is 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 7, and it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Which also reminds me of another thing, but I'll get to that in a second. Why didn't God just make the water continue to flow?
He needed Elijah to move. He needed Elijah to go perform a miracle. And this could have been not necessarily for Elijah, and actually I don't think necessarily anything Elijah is doing is necessarily for him. I think it's for all the people around him. So for the widow to be convinced and to believe, I think that's what this is for.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to think about what was going on during this time that he was here. Because, I mean, God does not normally send his people to barren places to do nothing. I mean,
well, this is also... no, anyway, never mind. This is before he was hiding from Jezebel. Never mind.
Yeah, but I was mostly just thinking, well, he was sort of hiding from Jezebel at this point, too.
Yeah.
Because they were looking for him because he had said, you know, it's not going to rain until I say so.
And they were pretty mad.
Yeah. But one of the things that our dad wanted us to bring out, which was very good as well, is that the god that they were worshiping, which is Baal, and or Ashtaroth too, I think. But the
Baal.
yeah, I think I don't know.
Doesn't
Anyways,
matter. Doesn't matter. They're both
false
fake.
god, but Baal is supposed to be the god of rain and dew. He is a fertility god that was really popular with the Canaanites, and obviously had it trickled over into influencing the king and thus influencing.
Well, influencing Jezebel, and Jezebel influenced the king.
Well, Jezebel was a Canaanite.
Yeah.
She wasn't an Israelite.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, she influenced Ahab and all of them. She was the one who really brought it to Ahab. Because Ahab wasn't necessarily into it until Jezebel came.
Possibly. It's hard. I mean, the context of the preceding chapter kind of gives you some of that background.
Yeah.
They'd been steeping into paganism and idolatry before all this. His marriage with Jezebel just kind of threw gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
But so that just to give that context to the whole situation and why God chose a drought to be the message that he would affect them with is because it's basically showing them that the God they worshipped had no power and was no God.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting point to draw as well. And like Simeon said, God allowed the brook to dry up because he wanted Elijah to go somewhere.
I think it's also interesting too because it's like if you don't thirst for God, you get no water. And so they had no water because of that, because the thirst was for Baal instead. And Baal obviously is nothing.
It's an interesting point too.
So he just was like, okay, there's no water for you guys because you guys aren't asking for water. You're asking for a bowl.
With no water in it. Yeah, so in a way, God is, I mean, and of course we discussed this last week, but God basically in several preceding books in Deuteronomy and everything says, Israel, you do this, I'll bless you, do this, and you'll be cursed. And all these horrible things will happen, to the point where he even mentions drought and famine being part of the curses that would be upon them for disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
Where he says, as long as you follow and obey me and seek to do what I tell you to do, then you'll have rain and abundance and everything will be good. But if you walk away, then all these things are going to happen as a judgment against you. So that's the point we're at. And Elijah gets up and goes to basically the home place of Jezebel, which is probably the last place they would look for him. Because why would he go to exactly, the homeland of the
person trying to kill him?
Yeah. So pretty brilliant. I think God is a brilliant mind. Goes to the widow woman there who's gathering sticks and asks her something that would ordinarily seem pretty crazy, I think, to be in the middle of this famine, this drought, and to ask, well, first he asks for water, which, she's okay with, and then as she's walking away asks for food, and she doesn't have much, and the faith that it took for her to go through with that, I think, is difficult to measure. Whereas at the same time, I think it may have been mentioned last week, like, why not try anyways? You either eat one meal, then die,
or eat no meal, then die.
Or you eat no meal and die. Either way, you're going to die.
It also could have been in the context that he could have been in, like, the house at that time, too. And he could have been like, just stick your hand in there and then, see if more comes out. And she could have just been pulling it out right there and been like, wow, it's just not failing, I will make you bread.
It's like constantly pulling the ribbon out of your sleeve.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I just felt coming.
Yeah, well, I think, what it says is that before she does anything, he tells her to bring him bread. To the point where he says, go do what you said you were going to do, dress your bread, make it, but first bring me a little bit of it. So he's asking for something that I think would ordinarily be something that most people would have a hard time giving up, because food is very important to us, obviously. And so I think under that situation, it would be really difficult, especially when you have a kid.
Yeah, and he kind of almost like.
Plus, they don't know each other.
Yeah, let's say he like swore by an oath, I guess. He said, "But thus saith the Lord of God of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail."
And that's really the important thing in this situation as well, is that he doesn't just ask her for food and leave it at that. He gives her a promise from God And a lot of people speculate that they didn't know each other. I'm not sure that they knew each other, but I feel like she likely knew of him.
Yeah.
Because who couldn't have known about Elijah? You know, even the king was basically going around saying he's the one who's causing Israel all this trouble.
Yeah. Making him even more known.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point he does have to be like famous enough.
I guess he was kind of like a Hebrew superstar.
Well, and he's also recognizable.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is everybody recognized him by the fact that he wore like a hairy garment, just like a camel skin garment or something. It was like something simple. We read that he was a hairy man, but the word is more understood to mean that he wore something that was hairy, like it wasn't like a soft garment. Mom says it's also very customary in Eastern countries to be hospitable and offer food and drink to any visitors. It's considered an insult to not offer. Yeah, which is true as well, but under the circumstances, you know, you're here, this is your last possible meal before you die.
Well, that's why she didn't necessarily just like deny him. She gave him a reason why she didn't want to.
Yeah. She was like, I totally would if I could. Not able to.
Yeah.
But Elijah gives her that promise. And I think that, and the reason I even wanted to go over this again was because I think the significance of it is very important. That there's this really interesting spiritual parallel to draw from this. Dan and Susan shared, so with his words, she acted. Perhaps there was something in how he asked that inspired her to share. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it wasn't a forceful request. It wasn't like, give me food. It was like, you know, hey.
Woman, make me cake.
Well, I almost imagine, like, you know, when we often think of how Jesus would have talked, you know, we often think of like a soothing voice, the voice of many waters, like a voice that has power, yet you can like feel the compassion and love in everything that he says to you.
It makes me think of like, I guess like a father's voice, where it's like you can hear the authority in it, but you can also hear like the gentleness usually in like that voice. Like, because you can just tell the authority it has. You can tell the authority someone has by the way they talk too. It's the same thing we do with kids all the time. Like how new coaches have a really hard time controlling kids and getting their attention and stuff, and me and you can just say one thing and they'll be like, oh, okay.
They'll stand up straight. They'll first time
they'll beg for mercy.
Yeah, they'll obey, and they love us most of the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think we've ever had a kid who's like hated us because we were so strict.
No.
And even then, like, our strictness is very different.
If we did, then they were kicked out probably.
Yeah, probably. But so yeah, I can imagine that Elijah in this situation with a voice that is full of compassion and understanding for this situation and even this request, that she has just explained to him, I don't have anything, this is our last meal. And he's saying, okay, well, tell you what, first prepare for me. And for Dan and Susan's comment, I think this is really the thing that did it, was followed with a promise from God.
Why do you think he waited to ask for the bread? He asked for the water, but then as she was going, I guess maybe like he thought about it and was like, oh, and also bring me some bread.
I wondered that also, and I was thinking that maybe what the situation was maybe God had told him, well, so before God told him, I prepared a widow woman to meet you there who's supposed to help take care of you. Mm-hmm. And so as far as we can tell from what's given contextually, it seems like Elijah's going expecting to find this widow woman, but he's not really sure who she is.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is part of the test, like how, was it Abraham's servant went to find a wife for no, that was Jacob's servant.
I think it was Jacob's servant.
Someone will leave a comment about it, but anyways, we know the story. I think it's
I think it was Jacob's servant.
I think it's Jacob.
Yeah.
Not Jacob's servant, but Jacob's father's servant. So I guess Isaac, Jacob. Anyways, we'll get there in a second. But in that story, the servant goes to find a wife for. I don't think it was Jacob. No,
yeah.
It's
It doesn't sound like it was Jacob, because Jacob.
It wasn't Jacob.
Jacob had to work.
It was the generation before Jacob.
Jacob had to work for his wife.
Yeah, it has to be Isaac.
Yeah, he had to work like crazy for his wife. Isaac had Rachel, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
There we go. We
The
got it.
The servant found Rachel.
Yeah. Dan and Susan said, was he testing her willingness? Since she was fine with the water, perhaps she'd be okay with the cake too. Yeah, because I mean, and that's kind of where I was going with it was I think maybe Elijah was shown that there's a widow woman there, and here's kind of the test to figure out who she is.
Man, the widow women in the Bible are like, it's always like they give everything. Like the is it the widow with the coin, or is that like a poor woman?
The widow with one mite.
Yeah, with one mite, and she gave that. I think this is that same kind of scenario, is that she is giving literally everything she has.
To God.
Which is just to God.
Interesting.
I think it's a similar principle.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking. Was I think this is like the test of willingness, like Dan and Susan were sharing. This is like when Abraham's servant went and found a wife for Isaac, and he says, "Okay, Lord, if you've made my journey prosperous, let the woman who I find
draw water for me and my camels."
like be polite enough to go ahead and be like, "Oh, let me get you some water, and also let me do it for your camels." Like, and he was looking for someone who was mindful of the things that needed to be done, not just somebody who would do only what was required or polite.
Yeah.
You know, they would go above and beyond. So that's kind of what I think maybe he was looking for. And mom shared people who have very little are often more willing to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is true in many cases. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. But so Elijah shows up and he asks her for some water. She says sure, but this is the middle of a drought, so I mean water should be in somewhat short supply. And then asks her for some bread as she walks to get the water. And then, she explains the situation. And I think the parallel I wanted to draw was that I think this is also a way for us to understand the way the Lord works when it comes to how we study Scripture and ask for the Holy Spirit. Is literally we are a people that have very little of both. To the point, and especially if we're thinking of an end time application to this.
That we're in a drought.
Yeah, when there could be a time of serious drought and the world is just falling apart and all we have is this. I mean, it could have a literal physical application to that as well, that God says, look, I can miraculously provide whatever you need. So the question is, do you trust me enough to give up the last bit you have for my profit or for someone else? So I think there's a lot that can be taken from just this one story, but also just from the application of, the idea that bread is the word and that oil is the spirit, and that the two together is what is really necessary to keep existing. Like that life is dependent on this food, which comes from these two things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course water as well. But at the same time, God basically says, if you're willing to give to me, the last little bit you have, I can multiply it and give you more than you'll ever need. And what's cool too is that when you read in the story of Elisha as well later on, this same widow actually comes back again. They mention her again later, and they're like, "This is the widow that Elijah had done and had experienced the." So this was like a miracle that was known among people. So I don't know if I almost feel like there's a good chance that what she had, she didn't just keep to herself.
Maybe
I almost
she gave
feel
to
like
everyone else.
I almost feel like it could have been a means of provision for maybe the whole village. Sounds like Elsa's back to get the potatoes. But that's kind of what I pictured, is that maybe this was also a means to provide for everybody. Dan and Susan shared, he doesn't ask for what we don't have, but uses what we do have, provided we are willing.
Yeah.
Doesn't ask for what we don't have.
He might ask you to go get something.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
if we are willing and obedient, we will eat the good. We will eat the good of the land. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Love you. Yeah. So with that, that's just the one thing I wanted to mention, because it just seemed so significant For one, I mean, it's this over the top miracle, which is amazing. To literally just have a container that never ends.
Yeah.
Which happens again later with Elisha as well, but it's like a whole different scenario.
And Jesus.
And Jesus?
The fish.
Oh, with the fish, yeah. Yeah, so there's lots and lots of applications to be made there.
And then her son just dies.
Yes, so they experience this tremendous blessing. She receives this blessing by showing her faith in the promise of God through Elijah, which is, I think, kind of an example to us of trusting God beyond logic and reason, let's say. Because it wouldn't make sense to think that your barrel of meal would miraculously never end.
Yeah.
Or that the cruse of oil would never end. But she was driven to a place where there was no other alternative. She could either give it a try and see if God would keep to his word, or not, and just have died.
I mean, they were also at the point, like you said earlier, where they were already going to have their last meal, so they were already in a position where they were like, I guess trying whatever will work now, too.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, people had probably been rationing their stuff, so most people in the land probably looked really skinny and kind of emaciated from not eating much. Whereas I almost think, and of course Elijah may have been in the same camp, but he was also fed twice a day, every day, so he may have been skinny, but not like...
Not super lean.
Well, probably still was.
Well, not like really skinny, lean, like...
Because I just kind of picture what it looked like when he walked up. Like, did he look like he was healthy and like he'd been eating normally? Or did he look equally as like skinny and emaciated as everyone else and was like, hey, got any food? And that's something interesting to think about, but doesn't affect the overall theme of the story. So she obeys and experiences this wonderful miracle and experiences the blessing of having a prophet of God in her house. And I don't know if this is exactly related to the idea of a prophet's reward, and I think Jesus mentions that, like, different types of rewards. So whoever shall receive a prophet in my name or something like that shall receive a prophet's reward. Anyway, at least for this situation, great blessing over this woman for receiving this man and giving him food. So now I'm going to verse 17 of chapter 17 there, 1 Kings. And it came to pass after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick, and his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. And she said unto Elijah, What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? And he said unto her, Give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode, and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times, and cried unto the Lord, and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child, and brought him down out of the chamber into the house, and delivered him unto his mother. And Elijah said, See, thy son liveth. And the woman said to Elijah, Now by this I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in thy mouth is truth. So let's unpack that a little bit. Share Mom's comment here. Mom says, People who trust the Lord will do so even if circumstances can kill them. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Yep, and that's the thing, is building up to that level of trust, I think, is difficult for a lot of people, and I think that's why so many people won't have that level of trust.
I think that's why the widow was doing food first, and then having her son killed after, instead of her son just being killed and then having no food and stuff.
Well, and it almost sounds funny to say this, but being where she was from and all that, it's interesting that she wasn't driven to the point of like cannibalism or something. Because like when you read a lot of other stories here, might even be in Kings, maybe in the preceding chapters. There's a story about one of the kings walking on the wall, and a woman cries out to him, and he's like, "What can I do for you? We're in the middle of a famine," and like I think they were being besieged, is what it was, or something like that. And the widow was like, "We made a deal between me and this other lady that we would boil my son and eat him this night and eat, hers the next day, but she hid her child. Make her bring her child out so we can eat him." And the king like tore his garments and was like, just destroyed by this, with this horrific thing that was happening.
Yeah.
So it's, because a lot of people when they're in that situation tend to be driven to do things like that for survival's sake.
Cannibalism and whatever else.
Yeah, and I mean this is pretty much a pagan area, so it's interesting that they weren't driven to that point. Or that maybe this was just revealing that she was the type of person who wouldn't have done this sort of craziness. Like she was on the fence of believing in God versus being a pagan worshiper.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, God must have been working on her to prepare her, and I think partly the reason Elijah was sent for her benefit, but also maybe for the benefit of all the people there. And, I mean, Elijah was there for a while, so there's no telling what he may have done in terms of ministering to people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that nobody told that he was there. That, Ahab and everybody was looking for him, and there was never like a message sent saying, "Oh, Elijah's up there where your wife was from." I thought that was interesting too. That word never got back. Might have been because it was too far, something like that, because I think we had discussed it. It was pretty vast distance by walking standards.
And nobody wants to be traveling and wasting food, essentially.
Yeah. Maybe man would come to a stop. I don't know. There's so many interesting things about it. But so for this story, this event here, I say story, but it doesn't. That word just sounds like I'm saying it was something that was made up. But really, this is more like a historical event. Verse 17. Some really amazing things that I think we can draw from this. One is that prior to this event of this like resurrection of her son, she did not fully believe in the God of Elijah, which I find to be pretty fascinating, that she was able to be part of this miracle of multiplying food, to have seen from the very get-go that what Elijah promised came to pass, which is something that's not like logical or practical. It was obviously supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the end of verse 24 there, she says that because of this, because you've resurrected my son, I know that thou art a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in thy mouth is truth. It's almost like up to this point, Elijah has probably been educating her as to who the God of Israel truly is.
Yeah.
And like probably been studying, and they've been discussing, and of course he's lived with them for a while, so it has to come up like, so what do you believe? And so I think this was just the turning point of convincing her of all the truth that she had probably been learning up to this point.
Yeah.
And of course it doesn't say how long after this or anything, it just says, after these things. But some, just here from Dan and Susan, says, he was protected, but the people benefited from his presence. Maybe the widow woman's wasn't the only household that saw this same miracle. I mean, that's possible too. That it could have been more widespread for anybody who truly believed in God or something.
I don't know. I mean, it would recall something like that, I think.
If there were more people. Well, there's also a lot of miracles that Jesus did that aren't recorded.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally will sum up in just saying, and he healed many more people of all these different things. It just kind of gives you a lot of overview.
That's true. I guess they don't want to be super redundant, but...
Dan and Susan shared, and when she saw this miracle, she was fully persuaded.
When her son came back?
I think so. Are we talking to... Yeah, I'm not sure if they're specifically referencing the miracle of the multiplication of food, or... Yeah,
they're probably talking about
the son. Yeah, because
she has doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, because even then, like, I think you look at the whole event of the history of the children of Israel as they crossed the desert and everything, that they were surrounded by miracles, yet fell into idolatry within months of these miraculous events. Like, literally, God
Yeah.
provided water from a rock. He fed them with bread that appeared out of nowhere.
Yep.
He parted a sea for them
A pillar of fire protect them.
and
And
keep
light
them
their way.
warm at night, and also a cloud that shaded them, and miraculously made it so their clothes and things didn't wear out.
Yep.
Like you're surrounded by all of these miraculous, amazing things.
You were
yet-
given cheat codes to life.
Yeah, God gave you life hacks, and you still chose to fall into idolatry. And then Susan said yes for her son. Yeah, so, but so going from there, some other really interesting things to draw out of this, and I had mentioned this after the stream last Sabbath to Simeon and a bunch of others, and I think Dad as well, was that I think this is all, I mean, I know this is all also pointing to Christ, but I think in a way this is also a specific type of prophetic telling of Christ as well. Starting with, where is it? Just the beginning of this whole happening, right? Where he goes and asks for the food, he gets the food, the bread, so the bread is brought, and but the thing that really stood out to me was my Bible, which is the King James, when she's talking about gathering the sticks, says
2 sticks.
yeah, it says 2 sticks, which is the word that can also mean a couple or whatever, but it usually just means like 2. Which wouldn't be enough to do anything that she was really talking about unless these were really big sticks or something.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course we discussed last Sabbath as well, everything from like the meanings of the names of these places being relevant as well. But also, leading up to this point, she's gathering 2 sticks, which I even asked little Eric I say little, he's kind of a big Eric now, but I even asked Eric, what he thought that might mean. And he actually came to the same conclusion that I did, and we both thought of the cross as being this idea of these 2 sticks. And the reason I think this is an interesting prophetic lineup of what's going to happen is it's this woman and her son. She's gathering 2 sticks so that way they can die. Or, not so they can die, but then they will die thereafter. And then right after this whole event where she's gathered the 2 sticks and everything happens in between, her son dies. It's almost like, for me, it was kind of like thinking of the giving of Christ, of course.
And
then,
resurrection.
But even in between that, what really stood out as being an extra detail to that was that Elijah
Stretched out 3 times.
stretched out over him 3 times. Which, and I mean, I looked up the specific word, it doesn't mean like what other, like, when it talks about in the Bible, sometimes it says a time, and that can refer to like a day or a year or things like that. I don't think that word specifically denotes that, but it was interesting that he stretches over him 3 times and prays, and then there's a resurrection.
Well, even if it was 3 long times and 3 short times, it wouldn't really matter. The point is that it's 3.
Yeah.
It's symbolic of Jesus' death for essentially, I guess, 3 days, if you count like death to resurrection.
Or, yeah, his imprisonment, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the whole legal course to when he was resurrected. So yeah, and then he's resurrected, and then the woman is convinced of God based on the resurrection, which is really the whole basis of Christianity. Is centers around the resurrection, and that's why we believe God is who He said He is because His Son resurrected. And Dan and Susan said, and remembering that the woman throughout the Bible is the church. Which is an interesting parallel.
They never named the woman, they just called her the widow. And
yeah, well, that was kind of the other point I was thinking.
Maybe you just needed to know that it was the woman.
And I did want to make that kind of correlation as well. From there's 1 or 2 stories. I don't remember if it's Hosea or where it is, but it centers around the idea of marriage, and this is where that interesting connection came up in my head, was that the only thing that nullifies a marriage is death. So when you die, you're allowed to remarry. And there's a passage in the Bible, I didn't think to look it up this week, maybe someone out there knows which one it is, but it says something to the effect of, I think if I remember correctly, it's like talking to Israel, and he's basically saying like the false gods and stuff that you had married yourself to are now dead. And basically saying like now you're allowed to remarry the true God, the one who can redeem you, kind of thing. And so in a way, that's almost the way I was looking at it, was like the widow woman is basically the redeemed, with God the Son as the offering that would redeem them. So, I mean, it's interesting. It would be worth looking into because it's kind of a fascinating parallel to draw. And let's see. Yeah, and so the resurrection convinces her. She's on board with it now. And there's one part too I wanted to look at. Oh yeah, just one of the indications of a timeline, kind of, in verse 15 was describing the miracle, where it says, and she and he, Elijah, and her house did eat many days.
Verse 15?
Huh? Verse 15, yeah.
Oh. Oh, and he and her rose. Did eat many days.
And Dan and Susan said, and he carried him to a loft. Perhaps the loft could be likened to the sepulcher that Jesus' body was placed in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I thought as well, was if you want, I mean, a loft is hardly an exalted position.
The interesting thing about...
Other than geographically.
The interesting thing about resurrections that I kind of thought about for, like, the common theme is that they're taken somewhere private, and then just, like, the prophet or whoever is performing the miracle, and, like, the dead body is. So in a way, it's almost symbolic of, like, the Holy Spirit and then the body, I guess.
Sure.
Being just, like, alone and then just, I guess, revitalizing the body, or rejuvenating the body.
Yeah, all of the above. Revitalizing would be an appropriate term. But yeah, that was another thing that I thought of too.
In 15, interesting, it says, and she and he and her house.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe any animals or whatever else she had.
Well, I mean, I think it's just describing her son, but if she only had the one, why would it say in her house instead of just being like...
And her son, that's what I was wondering. So maybe just anybody else who came by and was like, do you have any food? She would just, yeah, here you go.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, eventually everyone in the town would be looking at her going, why does she look so well fed?
Yeah, especially because, it's not that, like, she was just being fed twice a day. It's that she was, have an infinite source of bread and oil.
Though if we were, I mean, this is kind of a reading between the lines thought, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if this miracle worked the same way the manna did in the Exodus, in that you had to gather a sufficient portion on the day of preparation, and that you weren't going to gather more on, like,
the Sabbath.
Because I feel like God is pretty consistent, and with this kind of miracle, I think it falls right in line with that. So, I mean, it doesn't really affect the story by much, other than saying I think that could have been the case.
I guess, but I also don't know if they were making, like, abundance of bread all the time, or maybe I guess they were, or...
I'm sure they were at least making it sufficient for what they needed.
Yeah, unless they were just using it for when they needed it.
Yeah. Oh, and what's kind of interesting, too, I guess, is, if we wanted to make this relation, is that Elijah is one of the people who visited Jesus when he was here. And in this kind of strange way, if this were going to be prophetic of the giving of his son, then Elijah had a portion in that of encouraging Christ prior to his passion event.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be an interesting relation as well. Because what's fascinating is, like we said last week, like Elijah kind of shows up out of nowhere and just kind of explodes onto the scene and does all these awesome things for God. And then almost as quickly as he's introduced, he's taken out.
Yeah. He's a very short portion in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this is a 3.5, maybe 3 3/4 year time frame that we're reading. At least that's what it indicates, because that's how long the whole thing was.
It's like 3 pages in the Bible.
Might be a little longer, because there was a bit of a period of time after all this where he's kind of mentoring Elisha.
Yeah.
But
And he's like, you'll get a double portion if you watch me get taken to heaven. Which is interesting, too.
yeah,
Like, he only got a double portion if he watched him go to heaven.
which we'll
Well,
discuss
we'll
as
get to.
well, because that was
ideas.
really interesting too.
I have ideas.
Yeah. Dan and Susan shared, if people knew of the miracle, and they certainly did, I'm thinking there would be those who would think maybe the same thing could happen for us if we go to her home. Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you have one home that this miracle is happening in,
It makes me
it's
think
not
of like
happening
the
in
crowds for
yours.
Jesus, always walking around. If I can even just touch him, then I will be healed.
Yeah,
Instead of him specifically performing a miracle.
Or even when the Spirit of God was on Peter, and it was like, they were like people lining up, hoping that the shadow of Peter would overshadow them. They were like, just because of the miracles that God was performing through him, there were people who were just hoping his shadow would touch them.
Yeah.
And
It's
that they
so
would be
crazy
healed.
to me how humans think.
Yeah.
And like you get to that point where you just think somebody is so exalted to the point. I mean, obviously they were to the point because God was working through them, but it's like that's kind of where the human mind goes. It's so extreme. Like into such extremes that like even if his shadow touches me.
Hmm. Yeah, and of course the Catholic Church exalts Peter as being the very first pope.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, there's lots of extremes that people take things to.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like the human mind is so easy to like extreme. I think that's why idols are so popular, is because it's like so easy to go to these
Mass
really
placebo
ridiculous,
effect.
extremes that are just like humans are flip flops, dude.
Humans are flip flops. Yeah, I think that's an important point as well. People are easily radicalized in different ways. Fanaticized. I don't know if that is. But the point is to be as balanced as possible and just to place all your trust in God, and then I think the rest will be taken care of. Because the whole point of all these different amazing miracles is for our benefit to learn that we can trust and have faith in God to provide and to lead us where He wants us if we are.
And not only that, we can also do all these miracles.
Yeah. I mean, if He prompted us, I mean that's something that's really weird to me. Is Elijah was the type of person who God told him to do something and he just went and did it, and it didn't seem like he had much question. And
it wasn't much doubt. He has doubt later, but.
Yeah, and that's something that really is interesting to me, is if God impressed me to walk up to somebody who was dead and pray over them 3 times to resurrect them, I honestly don't know that I could picture myself having the faith that it would work.
To heal them?
To resurrect, or to heal,
them.
or to do anything. Obviously, it wouldn't be me.
It'd be like going up to Dad right now and praying over his ankle 3 times.
Yeah.
Like, do I have the faith strong enough to... It needs to be the size of a mustard seed. It needs to be that big.
At least that big.
It needs to be at least that big.
And that's kind of the whole thing, is it's like God wants to teach us that when He calls us to do something, He will empower us to do it as well.
Yeah.
And that we can totally trust Him, that if He says, hey, and I mean, this has happened to me before, where I've been given a strong impression about talking to somebody. And I've gone and I've talked to them, and it's ended up being a very positive spiritual conversation with complete strangers that just pop up. And it's not because I'm guiding the conversation, but it's because there's something that they're bothered by. And you'll just talk to them, and they'll be like, well, actually, this is what's going on in my life right now. And then you just, you're able to be part of that ministry. Dan and Susan said, it's reassuring to know that with Him, all things are possible. Absolutely. So moving on from there, like I said, there's lots, I think, to unpack in between all this stuff. But we'll go ahead and go to chapter 18 and start reading in there.
That's all I can really think of right now, at least.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots to look at in terms of ways we can apply what was happening to us, I think. And end times and things like that. And that's part of the reason I even wanted to look into this study, was because, it talks about the end time being the days of Elijah kind of thing. And I think that it was something that I just wanted to do, was look at what was happening then and look into the future kind of and look at what was ahead of us.
Yeah.
To what type of people God is looking for in the end time, to carry the Elijah message or things like that. Going on to chapter 18, verse 1. And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And it's interesting that seems to be all the detail he's given. And I think we mentioned this last Sabbath as well, but God is good about giving you only as much information as you need at the time you need it.
Yeah.
Like if he told Elijah everything in advance, then it might have been overwhelming, or Elijah might not have known the time frames, or not to say that God couldn't, but I think it almost reinforces the idea of reliance upon God.
Like and that's just like one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's ever really been like a 10-step process where he's like, do this, except for the sanctuary or something more specific.
I mean, it's something specific when you're building something. Or I guess kind of like Moses. Moses, he was like 120 years building an ark like this. But that was kind of it. He didn't necessarily... He said pitch inside and out, so that was kind of specific.
Yeah, well, you're talking about Noah?
Boaz.
Boaz? Moses and Boaz?
I hate that. I was thinking of a joke. I hate that.
Joke?
Yeah, the joke.
Oh, yeah.
Moses and his ark.
Yeah.
I hate that, because Moses had an ark, but not Noah's ark.
Yeah, when you said pitch inside and out, I was like, are we talking about the same guy?
Yeah, the little ark.
You mean laden inside and out with gold, or... Yeah, it's funny. It's a common slip-up, so it's funny. Cool. We're going on from verse 1 there, going into verse 2. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for it was so that when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. Something that I think is really important here as well, that gives us the context of why Elijah had to go away, is that this tells us that Jezebel was having the prophets executed.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who stood for God was being killed. And I think it's primarily because of the declaration that God had made, or the judgment that God had declared against them. And so I think it was kind of her effort at like getting at God or trying to affect the change, maybe even to draw out Elijah.
So she could kill him?
Yeah, so she was just doing anything she could to get at God. Which is definitely the spirit of Jezebel.
Is Jezebel is she like basically called like the most wicked woman of like the Bible, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. She obviously was heavy into idol worship, and
she was horrendous.
She was an interesting lady, if you could call her that. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, she. In fact, the Bible basically says that she was the reason that Ahab excelled so much in wickedness.
That's what I was saying, right?
Yeah.
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 Good thoughts. So for it was so when Jezebel cut off the prophets with the Lord that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water. So Obadiah is someone who's very close to the most wicked king, yet Obadiah is still a righteous person. He still trusts, or seems to believe in God and know God, which must be an interesting situation to be in. Which I think also tells us that during the end of times as well, that God will make those sort of provisions, that there will be people in very high positions of power who will be still serving God and doing things somewhat under the table.
He was doing it sneakily because he didn't want to get killed himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, he was doing this. What was even more interesting to me was that he was able to sneak away so much food and resources.
Yeah.
That there was, I don't know what he did, whether he just messed with the books or whether there even was like a record of what was going in and out of the palace. But the fact that he was able to sustain 100 people with bread and water
and basically provide
He
for
was a
them over this
governor,
period
so
of
I
time.
mean, maybe he just did it from his own food supply and stash, and
I mean, I doubt they were giving him enough food
Yeah.
for 100 people.
yeah.
So I think it was just an interesting arrangement that either God had made them blind to, to what was going on, or Obadiah just had a really sneaky way of essentially, I guess it would technically be stealing, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what the context would be. Um, but needless to say, God was providing the needs for these prophets by Obadiah. And it's interesting as well that later on, as we read, during Elijah's depression time, that he thinks he's the only prophet left.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he meets with Obadiah, and Obadiah's like, haven't you heard? I helped people. We'll read on, because then I'm basically spoiling what's ahead. Verse 5. And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go into the land unto all fountains of water, and unto all brooks, peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So they must have been losing some at this point. So they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and he fell on his face, and said, Art thou my lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go, tell thy lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, What have I sinned, that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whither my Lord hath not sent to seek thee. And when they said, He is not here, there he took an oath of the kingdom and nations that they found thee not. And now thou sayest, Go, tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come, I tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me. But I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth.
Yeah, it must have been that Obadiah knew that like Elijah was like a nomad and just kind of was like wherever he wanted to go, just kind of walked around in his camel skin. And
That wherever God told him to go, Elijah went there. And
Elijah was like, okay.
Yeah, so that's the interesting implication as well, is that first Obadiah is afraid of Ahab, but I think it's mostly because he's afraid that he will have not taken action on having found Elijah. Because naturally, the decree was most likely to just kill on sight.
Yeah.
I would imagine, because they were killing all the other prophets. So I think if Obadiah went to Ahab and said, I found Elijah, he's over here, and then you go there and he's not there anymore,
Yeah.
then I think that would be the cause in which he would
Execute Obadiah.
execute Obadiah, because he had not
Killed him.
taken the initiative to slay him when he found him.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the risk in going to Ahab and being like, I found Elijah, he's over here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because at this point they're starting to look at all the brooks and rivers. So had Elijah not moved up north, then there's a chance that at this stage they would have found him anyways.
Yeah.
So
if Elijah had gotten comfortable just living off the ravens.
Yeah. Yeah, then I don't know. But he went where God told him to at the right time, so. So he meets him there. He's afraid of him. And also I think this is an interesting prophetic thing of the very last days as well. Is that in the times when the Elijah message is going out, let's say, and God has his people, this sounds a lot to me like the time of persecution, where God's people are expected to flee into the wilderness, because at this stage...
And they're being killed.
And they're being killed. And the reason I even say that is because it's interesting that it mentions that they look everywhere for him, which is pretty much going to be what the situation will be at the end, that they will be looking everywhere for God's people. And to the point where he's taking an oath from every city that they don't have him. And I think that it'll be the same at the end of time. Nations will be in agreement with each other
that they
aren't harboring anyone. That they're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interestingly prophetic with that as well. And so Elijah makes himself known there. And where were we at? And now let's just go tell the Lord.
10?
10. I think we were beyond verse 10 there.
No, 10 was where we left off.
Finally not. Okay, cool. Verse 11 then. It's actually 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
We'll finish up this one bit here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. Yeah, we read that part.
Yeah.
When I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me. Yeah, okay. And thy servant fear the Lord from my youth. Was it not told my Lord what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. That's a good cliffhanger to put it on. But luckily, everyone here can go and read the story. And
Everybody can watch their own episode of the Bible.
yeah. Be sure to tune in next week for your episode of The Bible.
Elijah.
Elijah the prophet of God. Oh, okay. So far, really amazing, interesting stuff. Very, I think, prophetic of what the end times shall be like. To the point where it is, I think, likely that God will have to miraculously provide for his people. Whether that means manna from heaven, bread from birds, or whatever the case may be.
Oil that fails not.
Oil that doesn't ever run out, so you can just keep pouring it. It's amazing. I almost picture that old toy that you could buy. It looked like a baby's bottle, and it had like what looked like milk in it. And if you poured the bottle upside down, it would look like the milk ran out, but it all just like disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't see it. And that's almost what I would picture, but it would just be continually pouring out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. Exciting times, and I think, all of this really shows us that God is in control of everything, and that he will do what he needs to do. And like they shared earlier, though he slay me, I will trust him. And that's really the whole point of it, is do you trust him no matter what? And I think really that's the beautiful confidence we can have in how he provides and in how he works, is that we've seen throughout the Bible time and time again, for his people, he is in control.
Uh-huh.
And that everything is going according to his plan. So as long as we can get with the program and just know that the greatest mind that has ever existed is the one in control and doing things, and that our Lord is the one who's doing it, and that we are on his side, it doesn't really matter what happens to us or when it happens to us. But we know that all things will work together for good to them who love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. So, and Dan and Susan shared the greatest story ever told. And that would definitely be true of the story of Christ, our Lord. And it's told time and time again throughout the Bible. So, with that being said, we will pick it up next Sabbath with 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17, reading about what goes on between Ahab and Elijah, and the whole story of Mount Carmel, because I imagine we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that will be something pretty interesting to discuss as well. So, but in the meantime, we thank you guys so much for watching, for tuning in, and for joining us for today's study, and for adding your input. You guys had a lot of good insights, and we appreciate that a lot. It helps when we share what the Lord has put on our hearts to share. So with that, we shall part ways. I guess we'll eat, do what we got to do, and see you guys next Sabbath. In the meantime, let's go ahead and have our closing prayer. Father, we thank you so much. Your words are eternal, and the truths you have left for them are for us. That your people in the last days would have the faith of Elijah and the faith of all your prophets and people who have gone before us. That throughout all history you have prepared your people and sent these messages that we might know what to expect. And we know that we can have full confidence in you. So we ask that you would help to strengthen our faith and empower us to be every bit as much like Elijah as we can, even more so that we might be every bit as much like your Son, Jesus, and that we might be effective servants in his hand, and that we might be able to be used in your last day work. So we thank you, and we appreciate the blessing of the Sabbath so much, for the rest, and for also everyone who was able to tune in online, that you were able to have us all partake in this time and in this message and in this special moment. We thank you and we love you, and in the name of your Son we ask these things. Amen.
Amen.